Thank you very much. Welcome to the Finance Committee's public hearing on the FY25 budget. We're live at WinCam. We want to thank Dave Gauthier and all the WinCam staff for their many kindnesses and technical help in setting this up. We're also thankful for their assistance during many televised hearings we held here during the last 9 months. As noted on each of the slides that we're going to show you tonight, all of FinCom's reports are available on the town meeting page, and we also thank the members of the Town Meeting Members Association, some of whom are here tonight, for help spreading the word about what's happening in town meeting. Thank you. We urge residents to visit that page to download our work product, and we appreciate your interest. We're all trying to do what's right for the town, and rest assured that that's on our mind all the time as well. Here's a list of the members of Finance Committee for 2003 to 24. Brian Vernalia got elected to the Planning Board, so we're down to 14. But we are grateful for the opportunity to serve. We work for town meeting. We advise town meeting. Town meeting decides. It's a privilege to serve. Here's the plan for tonight's hearing, and of course it's the plan, and the questions may take us in different ways, but we have a short presentation about the overall picture of the town, followed by some questions and answers on that, and then we'll move to education. Jeff Calabrese, who's vice chair, is going to give a short presentation on the education budget, have questions and answers. We're going to spend hopefully a couple minutes on Article 27, a very short presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers for all comers. The members of FinCom a number of them are here, and we appreciate them coming. Neelan Trong is the former chair, Rich Rohan, Luna Goldblatt, Patrick Madison, and Catherine Hughes. Other members are on the Zoom. With that, I'm going to keep going. Here's a short description of where we think we are. The town continues to maintain its AAA bond rating from Moody's. It's one of just a handful of towns in the Commonwealth that does so. The town has strong operating reserves, and the town has a manageable but uncertain future with respect to the capital repair of the town's existing buildings, including major systems within those buildings. Those assets are worth over $500 million. Here's a snapshot that we included in the Finance Committee's budget book. This is our 3-year outlook for looking forward from now. And the bottom line really is that provided that Springtown Meeting does not use significant operating reserves, sometimes called free cash, to fund FY25 operating expense, Finance Committee does not project the need for an operating override until the end of FY26 under all 3 of the scenarios we modeled, or the end of FY25 on 2 of the 3 scenarios. I'm going to spend a little more time on this next topic. We have had requests over a couple of years now from members of town meeting to show to residents and town meeting members what the effect of debt exclusions, and we have a few override, they're kind of continuous override votes that happened back in 2002. So this year we've come up with this chart, which is trying to explain the effect of that on the property tax. The next 4 slides show the property tax load that residents pay for debt exclusions and for permanent, specially dedicated overrides. The bottom of this chart in blue and red show the property tax load residents pay for debt exclusions now and for permanent, specially dedicated overrides. So in the blue, we have the debt exclusions for Winchester High School, for example, from McCall, the first part of Lynch. The red chart above that is the remainder of the borrowing for Lynch, and above that is an assumed debt exclusion for Morocco that we have modeled as taking place in FY30. On the top of those debt exclusions are the 2 capital and building stabilization funds. Those are permanent property tax overrides approved by voters in 2002. The amount has been adjusted a couple times by voters. On top of that, in gray, is the assumed property tax increase that would go into effect were the town and voters to adopt this Community Preservation Act in November of '24. And at the very top of this chart is the assumed what we're calling a low-end adjustment to the funding levels for the BSF and the CSF combined. That orange piece is modeled as a $4 million addition to the combined capital and building stabilization funds in FY26. And a very preliminary analysis that we've done indicates that the high end of what might be considered to be added to those funds is in the range of $10 million. So what this chart is showing is that if CPA and the BSF funds are, if $4 million were added to the BSF funds in FY26, voters would be paying approximately $24 million in FY26 property taxes to support these initiatives. Morocco would add to this if it were undertaken in FY30. Now, the next slide takes that same data and converts it to what it looks like for an average homeowner, an average residential property that we valued at $1,200,000 for residents paying about $500 in property tax. So these blue and red bars combined show the property tax an average resident would pay to support the debt exclusions. That's the blue piece. And then in red, the blue piece includes the original BSF and CSF overrides. What's being added in red is if the CPA surcharge were enacted and if an addition were funded for those two stabilization funds. So in FY26, $2,900 or about 20% of the average property tax bill would be paid for these purposes. And the red bar for 26 shows about $500 would be added to the FY26, a typical FY26 property tax bill to fund an increase in the BSF and CSF and the CPA surcharge. The next two charts are the same as the first two, only the amount of the correction, the amount of the addition to the BSF and the CSF funds has changed to $10 million from $4 million. And as I mentioned a little earlier, that's kind of the upper limit of a very preliminary look that we've taken at funding levels for the BSF and the CSF. And at these higher levels, if you brought that down to an average household tax bill, these additions would add there'd be $3,700 a year in FY26 would be paid for these initiatives, the debt exclusions, the CPA, and topping up the CSF funds. That's about 25% of a typical property tax bill. And the average addition would be around $1,300, which I'm showing here for 2026. The Morocco debt exclusion would raise that amount later, these amounts in FY30. So here's the bottom line of looking out many years at the effect of these kind of permanent exclusions and a permanent override like the CPA and the BSF and the Capital Stabilization Fund. Our bottom line is that we think the town meeting should be carefully thinking about the timing and the effect on the property tax of competing needs for these funds. And the three big issues we see are how to reset the purposes and the funding levels for the two stabilization funds, which support $500 million in existing assets, a possible replacement of Morocco in FY30, and the adoption of the 1.5% surcharge for the CPA. So I'm going to move on, and slide 11 lists the principles that protect our AAA bond rating. These are long observed in FinCom's practices. Operating reserves should not be used to fund ongoing activities within the operating budget. and operating reserve should not be used to fund additions to ongoing activities within the operating budget. And where we can, we should avoid the addition of FTEs where town management does not identify an ongoing permanent source of revenue to fund these additional FTEs. For FY25, there just isn't sufficient revenue, in our view, to add FTEs. In our report, we note there is an exception that we had to that general rule, but it relates to Lynch and the addition of a permanent building manager for that property. This slide just describes what we did this year. Our FY25 budget is structurally balanced, as Mi-Lin Trong balanced last year's budget. It's structurally balanced without the use of operating reserves. There were the changes that we made consist of adjustments on both the revenue and the expense side. We believe there's about $650,000 in more money to be had on the revenue side. Those are detailed in the reports, and we can answer questions about them later. On the expense side, the increase in the education budget was limited to $2.562 million. And I just want to assure people, and Jeff will go into this in more detail, 74% of the increased expense this year for the combined municipal and education operating budget will go to schools. The budget we propose preserves the requested funding for teachers in full. And the budget we propose provides a 4.12% increase for all other education expenses. In addition, FinCom deferred adding an FTE for the planning board, and we deferred adding an FTE for a deputy fire chief. We made some other very small adjustments in the budget, but that's kind of where we ended up. So that's where we are as an overall picture, and I thought we'd pause here before we go on to discuss education and see if there's questions in the room or from people on Zoom. If you have a question on Zoom, raise your hand and we'll escalate you to the trouble zone. And if there are questions in the room, yes, Roger.
You may have covered this in your introduction before I got here. Sorry, I was a little late. But
can you come up to the mic, Roger?
Oh,
yeah, we're just talking overview now. These are overview parts.
Yes.
Okay.
So my overview question. In the write up in the town meeting member association, they referred several times to a level services budget, and I would call it a business as usual or a level headcount budget. We don't have a service measurement or what have you. But do you have an approach toward level services versus level headcount or business as usual?
Well, I'd be interested in what other people think. Why don't I respond, Jeff? You want to take that, or Mi-Lin?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think our approach is looking for a zero-based budget annually. I think level service is interesting language where it is business as usual, where you're assuming we perfectly executed last year. So now we're just rolling that into this year, and you leave no room for management efficiencies or thinking about goals and objectives, et cetera. So I think we're making steps towards that, working across municipal and education. I think we have a little bit ways to go in terms of how we construct the budget. But for the past 4 years that I've been on this committee, we've been saying zero-based a lot and trying to get that mentality into the budget construction.
So just to follow up, are you going to speak to that in town meeting, to that principle? Because, you know, we hear level services over
I think
and over.
you're going to hear a little bit about that in the next topic, Roger.
Okay.
Thank you. We have other questions? Okay. Well, so we're going to move on to you know, for people who don't understand, might not understand how FinCom works, we divvy up the work. There's 15 of us. We divvy up the work among all the write-ups. One of the things the vice chair does is manage the write-up for education. So, Jeffrey, you're up.
Yes, so,
And I will move the slides for you,
all right, perfect. So-
unless you want to sit here.
Yeah, I'll jump over.
Do that.
Perfect.
Change the signs too.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, it's a,
You think he's not ashamed
Yeah,
to be
you don't
me?
wanna be called
Quickly.
John Miller.
Oh, God. Some things are beyond the pale.
all right. Awesome, thank you. So yes,
That
jumping
was
in.
unkind, Roger.
Jumping into the education budget, I think it helps to orient ourselves where we can get a little bit lost in the details of what a budget is. So I think a budget is strategy, how we align money and goals. So going into with that objective mindset. And before we even talk about money or goals, to Roger's question, from an objective standpoint, there's room for improvement before we even start talking about the budget. So setting guidance beforehand, having upfront dialogue. I know we have our budget summit. I would make an argument that it's not sufficient, that we have a missed opportunity on the front side of the process to set guidance that follows down into the rest. And this is, in blue are quotes that I received, those are not my words. So again, looking at how other towns do things, I would highly suggest going to Wellesley's budget book for schools, 476 pages. They have everything that you would want to see, left, right, up and down. But key takeaway is voted on select board guidance of don't give us a budget that's more than 3% increase, period. And that sort of sets the tone up front. Next, on Concord, if you see here, zero-based budgets, it's specifically called out in their budget process. So here are the conversations that happen, here are the agreements, and then that sort of flows into the process. So now let's talk about our schools. So, and I took a questions-based approach of just very simple questions, simple answers. So what's going on with enrollment? So this chart here in our budget book, I referenced the entire consulting book. So consultants that we've paid to tell us what's going on with enrollment, inclusive of 40B developments, every sort of variable that you would want to think. Enrollment is down and is projected to go down. I would make a comment that, you know, MBTA Communities Act is a consideration. That is not going to start any type of development whatsoever in the next year or two. It's just not going to happen. So I think these results sort of tell us in the short to medium term where the enrollment is projected to go. This is an overlay of enrollment versus our operating budget. So again, very simple numbers here. Enrollment down, budget up. And I'm just sort of, when we went through this, looking at what the data is telling us, and sort of just seeing what's being presented and getting whatever insights we can. To John, what John alluded to, sort of just setting the tone of what's the percentage of the budget for schools. We're at about 65% in total. So it is the majority of everything that we spend in town. So now this is where we get into the data. So thanks to Stacy and co, we were able to get budget items, line items that we consolidated, put it together, built a little data set, and then asked a couple questions. So the two insights that we saw were budget items that were unspent year over year, the same line item, so that gets back to zero-based budgeting. If we did zero-based budgeting, that wouldn't exist. And then number two, the budget is highly variable. So 12.5% of the entire budget goes to a different place than we intended. So I'll show you those numbers. So point number one, you know, what line items are not used at all? So for 2022, we had about $300,000 of line items that just weren't spent. 2023, about 217,000. FY24 is incomplete data, but it's about 275,000 as well. So key takeaway is it's not really a zero-based budget. I will say we're taking steps in that direction, but when you look at the line items, there's still a lot of room for improvement.
Jeff?
Yep.
It looks like somebody might be in your waiting room on the Zoom call.
Oh, yes, you are correct.
I was monitoring that, Carol.
Thank you. Perfect. So now the variance part. So that 12.5% is a lot of money. So if you look at 2022, about $7.1 million moved around in this budget. So whether it's underspent, overspent, and when you look at the line items, again, the takeaway is there's plenty of room for decision making, moving the budget around, reprioritizing through the year. There was no need for any RFTs, so you can see how the money is very liquid. I have line item detail, it's a lot. So thinking about how to package that up, but it's in the budget book and I'm happy to share it. And here's just a clear example. So looking at infrastructure here are the budget numbers so we can orient ourselves. So for budget FY23, we had about $70,000 budget. And if you look at underspent, overspent, we spent $450,000 more than we budgeted for. So this is for what we call critical infrastructure repairs, I think some security systems, et cetera. When I talk to schools, yep, the money was well spent. But the takeaway is the budget can absorb these things. So if we're looking for consulting dollars to put together a literacy strategy, we need $100,000 for this. From what I'm seeing in the data, it's there. It's just a matter of rank ordering things and prioritizing things. So next is goals and performance. So we had money, and then how do we allocate it towards goals? And the FY25 budget book, the document that was presented, is silent on goals. So there are no system deliverables, there are no system objectives. And I've articulated that in a very clear manner that to me is a material gap. So I think in terms of us as an advisory board at town meeting, we should be explicit with how we're allocating this money. And next I went through a bunch of other budgets. So FY22 budget had some system goals. I would make an argument that these are not, what we teach kids, SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based. These are more mission statement type things. But the real interesting point is number 4. This is where we went into our literary consulting, literacy-based review, where we hired a consultant, got a report. That report's in the budget book and linked. There were a bunch of recommendations. I know work has been done. I'm not sure we fully executed against those recommendations. And it seems like we need another literacy revamp. And I think some more time put in place on the strategy before we start spending money would be well spent. So that boils down to, we had I'll handle it. So the recommendations, so again, principle-based approach. We had 3 core objectives as FinCom: structurally balanced budget, protect our AAA bond rating, improve our capital programming. And we've really taken that seriously. So principle-based. Enrollment down, continued to go, and is projected to continue going down inclusive of 40Bs, and the MBTA Communities Act is not a factor. Unknown goals and objectives, lack in transparency on how tax dollars are being allocated towards goals, but also, as we mentioned, a request to support teachers, and that's something that we fully agreed on. We understand what happened in other towns. We don't want to be in that position, so that's why we've reached a unanimous recommendation of $2.56 million for schools, which is exactly what they asked for to support teachers. And if they need additional money for consulting or strategy, we have an RFT process. But what we've seen, we're not at the right point that a strategy is investable on that front. So that's the basis of our recommendation.
Okay.
We'll switch back.
Yeah, sure.
I have a question. I have 2, actually. So you might want to go back a slide, Jeff, in a second. But
Yeah.
my first question is related to goals.
Yeah.
That the education was silent on goals. Did other department budgets come in with goals? Maybe they weren't all measurable and achievable, but how does that sort of lack of goals compare to DPW, police, library, and other goals?
Yeah, on the municipal side, there's, I think, an initiatives segment, sort of like,
Yep.
here's how we're thinking about allocating the money, here's how our intended outcomes. Again, I think this applies everywhere where ideally we have KPIs, we have objectives, we can measure things. We've been saying that over the past 3 years, and I think we're making progress. But for a budget of $70 million to really not say anything on goals or objectives is, something.
Okay. And it's kind of hard to see. I know it's in the book, but I'm just thinking for this hearing, if you could go back to the enrollment slide, if you picked a high water mark, maybe 2017, 2016, what's the overall drop in student enrollment to your 2024? Looks like it's what, 400 children?
Yeah, I think the high water mark is like 47, 48, and then I think 400 students is correct on sort of the drop.
In 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, and if you scroll up one, John, onto this, so yeah, and we're projected to go down, I believe, another 100 or so students.
Okay. Thank you. Those are
The data shows that the K through 5 numbers continue to be lower.
yeah.
So we're
I think I was tracking that when I was
Yeah.
in town meeting. It was 7 years straight
Yeah.
of, so maybe we're up to 8 or 9 years straight at that K through 5 level.
Right.
And what you're seeing, because I haven't looked at it so much this year, you're seeing K1 enrollment staying in that 330, 340 class size, not 380, 390 class size that we saw graduating 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, the funnel up top has shrunk.
Got it. Okay, I just didn't, I want to see the delta, and it was kind of hard to
Did we,
follow the
in
lines.
the appendices to the budget book in the back, there's, let's see, it's appendix, A5, which is in the Bates number is 62. You have to download the appendix we did not print the 77-page appendix. But,
A5, you said.
but
Okay.
at page 62, beginning it there, we have a comprehensive analysis of enrollment that goes back several years.
Thank you.
So we've been tracking that.
I would say, and I'll stress again, if you want a contrast, look at the Wellesley budget book.
Give me a message there, Jeff. Thanks. I'll do that.
Karen Connolly has a question for you.
Yep.
Karen, are you there?
Yes, thank you. In the work that you did, putting together your analysis, how much did you work with the school department and with administration? And for instance, did you ask them about the unspent funds and talk to them about what you see as the lack of transparency? I know in past years there have typically been a number of meetings between FinCom and school administrators, and I'm wondering if that continues to be the case.
Yeah, good question. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me? So in the beginning, we developed a framework. I was leading the school budget. We had made some changes based on feedback, so making sure that we abundantly met OML rules as we were. But yeah, had initial conversations, initial dialogue, questions, answers, iterations. I've clearly articulated in person that a lack of goals is a material gap. So we had that dialogue, information was flowing, I asked questions, I got answers, and then you couple that with the approach of just what is the data telling us. So I think that's the two approaches put together is what's represented in this presentation. So this wasn't done in silo. We've asked for this consulting report for enrollment, and then also schools came to one of our meetings, I forget when, but fully presented
March 26th, I
March
think.
26th as well.
Yeah, and we've gotten, Karen, we've gotten complete cooperation with the school department. Andrew Marin has been great. The superintendent is great. We've had very good relationships with the chair of the the school committee. This has been a no drama exercise. We've tried to just exchange the data and have good discussions.
So what was their response to the question of why do you have all these funds that you didn't spend? What was the answer to that question?
Yeah, changing priorities. I think it's on the same of we had to reallocate if you look at the large variance. But I think the gap to solve there is key goals and objectives. So are we going into the budget season knowing where we're trying to spend this money versus reacting to issues and then moving money around? So again, when you look at the line items and you see $75,766 allocated to a specific line for 3 years, that's a very valuable insight into the construction of the budget. But like I said, there's been progress made on that zero-based premise to really think how we want to allocate this money so it's not so variable.
Yes, Roger.
So I was a little confused in your report, but in the presentation here, you indicated that the 4.0 increase in the contract was accounted for in your, what, 4.12% total increase. But
No, I probably misspoke on that, right? Let me make that clear. The budget we proposed, that was in my first presentation, it fully covers the contract requirement with respect to teachers. We obviously, we're gonna support that. So the dollar amount we propose fully supports, I believe there's a 4.0% raise to teachers this year, which is fully supported.
Yeah, that dollar amount came exactly off of the budget book for personnel. So the request was $2.562 million for people, teachers, and that's what we approved.
so is it 4% or is it, what is it?
I believe it's
It's like
4.05.
4.5 of the actual personnel services increase, right? But
It's
that translates to
4.05, I think
4% for the total budget.
Yeah,
It's 4.05% for the entire budget, 4% for teachers, 4.12 for everything else. It averages back to 4.05.
And so what's the contractual increase?
so I think it was 2.562 million minus about 50,000 for step-ups. So I think it's very close to that $2.5 million.
But in percentages, what are we talking?
4%.
But what's in the contract? That's
It was 4%.
is 4% and plus step and track?
Yeah, so there was a contractual obligation of 4% plus a voluntary decision on step-ups that were made, which is the difference.
Step-ups aren't voluntary, they're in the contract, but they're, what's that?
It's in the contract, yeah, for the masters.
Someone gets a degree, they have a step
Yeah.
up. Yeah. We're
So,
talking
but
about
that's more than half a point.
It's 5.5% year over year, FY '24 to '25 personal services. The difference between FY '25's personal services to FY '24's personal services was 5.5%.
Okay, so it's 1.5 is step and track, and then 4% is the contractual amount, is that accurate?
I don't know if the split is that way, but the overall number is, I don't know if you got the split. We never got the split between how much was for the master's piece.
Yeah, we didn't get if you look at the budget book, it is a request of $2.562 million for these two things, but not,
Well, it's three things actually, because it's retirements also. And retirements are oftentimes a big reduction. But I'm just confused as to how it would all fit into the total increase in the school budget, because it's mostly salaries that you're paying, right?
Yeah, well, so again, if you look go to the appendix, you'll see the numbers. We have, there's an appendix A3 and A31, which is in the appendix of the budget, which A31 lists all the personal services items that are supported by this budget. So that's all the teacher salaries and all the support we're providing for teachers, 3.1.
So if personnel is going up 5.5%, and personnel is what portion of the total budget?
I don't have the number in
Okay.
my head, but what we're saying is the personnel service budget, these are, this is percentages that no human being, I don't keep them, but, so there's the teachers, and then there's the rest of the personal services. The teachers are going up at 4.0%.
4.0 plus step and
4.05,
track,
four-
so, which
4.05.
makes it 5.5, right?
The rest of the budget the rest of the personal service budget is non-teachers.
But basically what you're saying is you're satisfying their request.
Yes.
Exactly, to the dollar. So if in the budget book, that was. the
And it's
request.
5.5%
For personal
For
services.
personal, yeah,
for
But
personal services.
we approve, the line
Personal-
items.
We're approving what was in the contract.
We're approving,
Right?
which is
Which is the
4.05
request.
on the whole budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the whole budget is only going up 4.12?
I think it's 4.05%.
4.05.
Yeah, I'll have to study it further, I'm sorry. Other question, there is another enrollment study proposed. Have you guys made a recommendation on that yet?
We have not yet addressed it. We did not get the motion book until April 19th. So we after we submitted our book. So we have not taken up that, we didn't see that article yet, the final article.
And then the third thing is just a point, which is I've forgotten the term. Some people call it turnbacks or whatever, but whatever you put back into the general fund. It used to be the schools never put anything back into the general fund, and they had to come to reserves, to the FinCom reserve one time because they missed the mark in the other direction, spent more than they had. But my feeling is that it could go either way, but like
The last 5 years, I think FY '23 was about $12,000. That was reverted. FY '22 was about $8,000. FY '21 was, I think, up 70,000. So
yeah,
it's-
that's chump change. So but what you were talking about, the 500, roughly $500,000 that wasn't being spent, right, or something?
Or that was the money that was reallocated for infrastructure expenses. So that budget was overspent by $450,000. So it came from somewhere, and the domino effect. If it came from somewhere, no RFT, it got absorbed somewhere else.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just wanted to make the point that a budget on the size of the school budget, some of these variances aren't that big, and shouldn't be something that anybody's too concerned about. But
Depends on what variance you're talking about. In budget variance, I think 12.5% is significant. At the end, basically the entire budget's being spent, so 99 point.
yeah, I guess I was referring to your list of budget of line items that didn't have any spending associated
I
with it.
think the point there, Roger, was that you have line items that go for 2 or 3 years. They have very specific dollar amounts
Okay.
repeated
Okay.
Yeah.
and
To
not spent in those years.
Yeah, to your question on zero-based budgeting, that's the intent. So we look at every line item and change it according to what it
And
needs.
on the enrollment, I also want to sound a little bit of caution in that I was very strong on following the data as far as McCall was concerned, and party to the decisions that led to having to go back and make it bigger 3 times. So just
That's fair. Yeah.
a little bit of humility is a real
No,
good thing.
we understand. No, I agree. Other questions? Okay. Well, thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Any other questions from the audience here, or comments by members?
I guess I do.
Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
I don't know if you have the answer to this. I was trying to understand, going to the school department's webpage to see their summary of their budget. It did look like there were special education increases. Did you look through sort of what are some of the other line item increases in their budget that might be growing at faster than the 4% in that other category, and do you have a position on those?
Yeah, so we have the data of, year over year line items you know, X% up, X% down. I think that's where you marry that with the variance analysis and the fact that the schools can just spend the money however which way they want it by law. So I decided to take more of a objective top-down, how is this budget behaving versus goals. That was just my approach, and sort of see where the data led us. So yeah, I have the data, I'm happy to share it, but we didn't go to the line item level and say, why is this up 5%, why is this up 10%?
Okay. All right, well, I'm gonna keep moving. If I can get my screen to work. So, the next, topic, I just wanted to have a quick presentation, a little bit of a presentation about Article 27, which is a Finance Committee article that relates to the, Capital Stabilization Fund and the Building Stabilization Fund. So I'm just gonna, just briefly describe, you know, when the articles were due, that was before the March 24 election. So since then, we decided in good faith to put something on the board to put that topic before town meeting. Since then, the select board appears willing to take the lead role in addressing issues identified by Finance Committee in Article 27. We look forward to learning more from the select board what they have in mind, and we're going to present the data that we've worked to put together at Springtown meeting. But we are comfortable serving in any support role that results in a match of the BSF and CSF purposes to funding levels to come back to fall town meeting and eventually to go back to voters. We believe that timely work on the correct problem is essential. So, and that we believe the problem is matching the purposes of those funds to the funding levels. The next piece in that, solving that problem, is to bring those alternatives back to fall town meeting. And then the third, the conclusive solution to that problem is going back to voters. I've read, there's a memo on the town meeting page from the town council, and I believe our position, every position FinCom has taken is entirely consistent with that memorandum. So that's Article 27 is in process, and we're very pleased that the select board seems to be stepping up, and that's welcome news. So that brings us to questions on any topic. So that's kind of what we wanted to cover in the public hearing. And yeah, if you put your if you're out and you have a question, you're out in Zoom land, raise your hand, and Catherine Hughes she's been very kind. She's run these things before, and because she's run so many of them, she gets picked on to do it. It's kind of she should deny it.
It's a curse of competence.
Yeah.
It's a tough job.
I always have another question. This is just on the bigger, probably should have asked it at the outset. I struggle with this question myself. As we think about long-range planning, by the way, thank you for all your analyses, especially on those stabilization funds. I think that's been a really important series of analyses and meetings that you've held on that topic, and I think it's really been valuable to all of us. So I do appreciate you. I'm glad you have I'm glad you have Article 27 on there. So and I hope town meeting members read your report and on that and think about that, because I think you know that's been a long-standing challenge, how we manage that in the town. So I'm glad you have time before town meeting to discuss that. On the operating budget, long-range planning, I struggle with the question about how do you plan for overrides that are supposed to last multiple years. Is there any way, I mean, since most of our budget is contractual raises, I think it's interesting that there could be a discussion between the select board and departments ahead of time before budgets are set. But we don't have really a measure of inflation that we can apply to say out budget forecasts, right? You don't do that, right? You know, it's like this budget is in real dollars versus,
Yeah, we don't have like an
we don't have
inflation
an
adjusted.
ability to do an inflation adjustment, but if you're planning an operating budget override that's supposed to last for multiple years, might you not, toward the end of that cycle, need to be dipping into reserves? That's my question, really, about the policy of not touching reserves.
Well, I don't wanna be the responding all the time. I'd be happy to have other members chip in, but I have some ideas on it. But anyone else wanna jump in? I guess, I think it's a combination. What attracted us to the capital side is that $500 million in assets are sitting out there. We're not gonna abandon town hall in the near future. We're not walking away from the high school. We're not walking away from a call. So, you know, we don't see many more productive uses of funds than to fix that, to make sure that we get the life cycle out of the buildings that was designed, and
Yeah.
that at a good level of service. I mean, one of my kids was at McCall when there was no hot water. That was a problem. So we don't want that. So it seems to me, and I'm just one member, we need to fix that and
Right.
get some stabilization on that.
That makes sense,
Because
complete sense.
We run
yeah.
into a mystic boiler,
Right.
you know, when you're talking about $2.5 million, that's all hands on deck drop, you know, and a lot of plans go out the window. So we need to figure out how to get a handle on the big things that
Right.
there's no disagreement about.
Right, that's the infrastructure, the capital,
But then-
right, that,
Then hopefully, then you can see whether you need some operating reserves for that. I mean,
right, so total agreement on the infrastructure, capital, predictable, when a window
Yeah.
needs to be repaired, a building roof needs to be repaired. What I'm really talking about is the operating budget, where we assume an override. You know, we don't know what's gonna happen with health insurance or energy costs or potentially other budget inflationary factors that are potentially outside of the town's control. And we make an assumption when we do an override that it's gonna last some number of years. Is the principle that say we're never gonna touch reserves implying that when we hit a pressure on the budget that says, oh, the override is run out, that is when we would expect to go for another override before dipping into reserves? Is that the stance?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about, because it's what you said, out of our control, in our control. And then I always go back to commitment to goals and objectives. So right off the block, we lost about over $1 million on that acquisition of Washington and Swan Street. So how does that fit in to our management strategy? So if we have these deep concerns, we're gonna go into operating reserves, we have inflationary pressures, does that make sense at a strategic level? Everything individually, you can make an argument, this makes sense, it's putting us in the right direction. So I think if we're committed, I don't necessarily buy in for the premise of we absolutely needed an operating override every X years. I think you can manage through that. Like we've managed as a committee to present a structurally balanced budget that we don't think introduces any risk to the town.
I think it is a philosophical question a little bit of what the tolerance is for operating overrides. Some people may believe that they're inevitable and they're gonna happen every 3 to 4 years. Obviously, the town's revenue constraints play into that as well. If you're capped at 2.5% on that end, you know, you can play with having longer-term growth plans of, you know, we wanna grow by 2.5% a year on the expense side and never have an override, or we wanna grow by 3.5%, which leads to an override every X number of years. But, you know, with the capital considerations coming into play at the same time, I think that's where it sort of complicates things a little bit.
Yeah, I see
And-
that.
and there are-
And I realize that puts a pressure on the operating budget too.
There have been a
Yeah.
couple weird things that have happened the last couple of years. I mean, you know, investment income
Yeah.
for many years
Yeah.
was 30,000, 40,000, 45,000. A couple of years ago, it's 900,000. So,
It's on track for over $1 million this year, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
and so,
been
like
lucky
in our
there.
budget,
Yeah.
you know, So at some point, we're in the middle of some school projects, which means we have money in the bank and we're earning investment income on it. But, and interest rates are up. So things are a little different now. Borrowing is more expensive. Having money in the bank is a little better. It's, I think it changes over time too, Carol, and things evolve, Yeah, go ahead, Nina.
Something which you mentioned already, John, is that to keep in mind that when you're spending the operating reserves on a capital project, a one-time spend, that's just it. But when you start to spend that money for the operating budget, the year-over-year stuff, you're guaranteeing that next year, if you do it for FTEs, then you're like, well, if we don't have money, we now have to start to fire, but we just hired.
Right.
Those concerns come up because anytime you do it with the operating side, on the operating budget, you're saying, we need this for the future, not just a one-time, 1 year.
Right.
So what happens if an override does not come through,
Mm-hmm.
then it's a
Then
bigger
you've
problem
added
then.
to your
So there's some caution
operating.
to say, okay,
Right, I
If you
see,
have the
I
money,
I
yes.
see that, I
Add
do
the
see that.
FTEs,
So that's
yes,
why I
all
ask
that,
it,
yep.
so like, if, rather than adding these positions and adding to the, recurring costs by having new headcount, you would suggest the town, if they want those positions, go for another override. Is that what you're saying, basically,
Well,
right? Right.
we're downstream.
Yeah.
I mean, we catch the budgets that the other people send us. It's not like
Right.
we came up with these numbers and said,
Right.
geez, let's start with
But
a $2
so
million.
I do differentiate headcount from a Washington Swanton that came to us, and that was a one-time something that we had to decide whether we were going to act or not, right? So
Yeah, and
anyway, that
it's a good
thoughtful. It's a good question, and this is a thoughtful dialogue.
Would it be fair to say, though, if we had, I think we have pretty good confidence in that we have great people working, we have great staff. We don't have a lot of problems that other cities and towns have. I mean, we really are blessed. I try to say that in the beginning of the report. We are lucky. We are blessed. We're in a wonderful place. And, this is not the gloom and doom committee, but we do have to sharpen the pencils, keep them
Right.
sharp.
And I think town meeting members, I mean, I'm thinking about this myself as a town meeting member, need to think about those. I'm thinking of the town manager's budget that has the deputy fire chief,
Yep.
deputy fire, and the assistant town planner position. Whether town meeting feels those positions have merit. They could, right, they could
We're
decide
not-
that.
We're not saying the
right, so-
positions don't have merit.
right.
No one's saying that.
That have
We've
merit
never said
in the 2025 budget, right?
Yeah.
So that will be a debate and a discussion in town meeting, right? So,
sorry, go ahead.
no, so for just for anyone who's new to town meeting, that budget number comes before town meeting as for those the town manager's budget, right? Those would be in the town manager's. But one is a fire department, one is town manager budget.
It's our budget that's before town meeting.
Yeah, but you put that before town meeting, and then town meeting could
Yeah.
amend it,
Town
could
town
debate
meeting
it,
is
do
in
whatever.
charge. We are
Right,
advisors.
exactly. So you're
Absolutely.
recommending that, but it might get debated and
Of course.
potentially changed in town meeting. I just wanted to.
Of course. And
Yeah.
I try to say that absolutely up front.
No, I understand that, which would
We're
mean,
advisors, town
what you're
meeting's in
saying is
charge.
that would result in dipping into reserves, which is what you advise we don't do, correct?
Well, I think, yeah, just to make the point, I don't wanna over labor it, but we're catching this.
Yeah,
We're downstream. It would be nice to catch a balanced budget. Our work would go a lot quicker,
And it's also, I'd say,
okay?
I hear you. It would be nice.
I think about it like this: of when do we want to have the pain? A little bit of pain now to
Yeah.
balance the budget. We
Yeah.
found $1.9 million.
I don't have an opinion yet,
Yeah.
just so, I'm just
Yeah,
thinking
that's
about
what
it,
from
which
a-
is why it's good we're having this conversation.
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Do we have any other questions in the chat? Okay, well, we are going to, yes,
Well,
I just wanted to make a point on this, on this discussion, that when we add a position, it doesn't mean that that it necessarily has to be additive to the budget, because there are other positions that could be eliminated. And when I first got involved in this, Chad Moore was the town manager, and I remember him saying that DPW was grossly overstaffed. And subsequently, the DPW was shrunk quite radically, close to 50%, and the services that were delivered got better. We shouldn't be thinking that the merits of a given position are isolated from the idea that maybe some other positions have less merit.
I agree with you, Roger, but I think what we're saying, we want to be very specific what we're saying. We don't recommend adding FTEs if the source of how we're going to pay for them through revenue has not been identified.
Right.
People, that's what people do when they go to the grocery store.
Yeah, to Carol's point, so I think, and if you do add a new full-time employee in a year that you're borrowing free cash, until such time as you do pass an override, you're borrowing free cash year after year.
Right. So, and the other thing is, in terms of percentage growth that we talk about, and you mentioned 2.5 or 3, I have never seen growth that low, except some exceptional year. And when you folks looked at the tax increase per household, it was like 5% for the past 10 years, 5% increase every year.
Property valuations are going up, right?
That property valuations don't. It's the levy that
Right.
that generates the 5%. The property valuations for a particular house would go up and down, but those numbers were average, I believe, and the growth in the budget is in that ballpark, 4.5 somewhere generally, and I think that's the range we should be talking about. Somewhere around 5%, which happens to be the average increase in household income, which is because of turnover, because new people are moving into town, wealthier people, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
A lot of houses being completely gutted and redone. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, we're going to declare victory. And thank you all for coming. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
on Zoom.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for coming, and thanks for everyone. Appreciate all the hard work by my fellow FinCom members too. It's great. We're grateful for it. Thank you.